So today we're going to show you how to do casting, and casting actually takes two individuals. So this time I'm going to be the teacher and Miss Wendell's actually going to be the student. What all of you will be doing when you actually cast. The first thing that you're going to have to do is take the lid to the centrifuge off, and you're going to actually lean it up against your side of the table, so top of the centrifuge on the table. And then what we're going to do is we would wind up the centrifuge. This weight is actually going to help spin the whole centrifuge around, and the metal that's molten in here is going to shoot into your flask. And so what we have to do is we have to wind this arm 3 times, and then we actually pull this stopper right here up, and it holds that whole contraption while we're heating your metal. The next thing that we're going to do is actually put the metal that we have in the crucible. This white part is called the crucible. Remember your flask that you have the piece in. We're going to put about half the metal in the crucible at once, and I'm going to save this little piece for later because that'll melt really fast later. But I'm going to take about half of this. Right now the crucible is not hot. I can touch it. So right now I just put half of the metal that we weighed in the crucible, and I'm going to put my gloves on, because the next thing that I need to do is I need to grab the flask from the kiln. And again, the teacher's the only one over here. If you guys are ever like watching, if Ms. Wendell demonstrates this, or if I demonstrate this again, we need to make sure that students are on the side of the kiln that's away from the windows and away from the kiln. So I'm gonna open the kiln, and it is pretty hot. Hopefully you guys can see. It's 979 degrees in the kiln right now, and I'm going to actually take my flask and I'm going to set it in the centrifuge and make sure that the crucible is pushed right up against there. And again, that's a teacher move. What we're going to immediately start to do is we are going to turn the torch on. So the next thing I'm going to do is light the torch, but before I do that, this is the rest of my metal. I want to make sure that I'm putting it inside the lid for the borax. Borax actually cleans the metal once we actually have it molten, and I'll show you about that later. One of the student tasks is putting the rest of these pieces of metal in the crucible as we're melting, and we also want to put the borax in the crucible. The borax again cleans the metal as we're working. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start heating the metal. But again, before we do that, we have metal in the rest of the silver in the top of the borax container. This is borax that cleans the metal. We're going to have you as students take a tweezers and take one piece at a time when we ask you to put the pieces of metal into the crucible to actually get the full weight, because again, it's easier starting with half. We're also going to have you use this spoon that's over here to take some of the borax and put a little bit of it into the crucible when you're asked to, and literally it's the tiniest amount. We do not want a whole spoonful of borax. It's like maybe a quarter of what that spoon is. I'm going to actually turn the gas on, and I'm going to light my torch, and I've got a little bit of gas flowing here. You can see that there's a flame on. Oops, I put a little bit too much gas on there and it blew the flame out. Sometimes that happens, so we'll just light it again. What I need to do is, hopefully you notice too, I'm wearing these weird green goggles. Part of the reason that I'm wearing those goggles is it protects my eyes from this really bright blue flame. It's not good for you to look at that flame unless you have goggles on, because the flame could damage your eyes. And again, we only have one pair of eyes, so we want to make sure that they last us our entire life. And we're going to wear those goggles in terms of safety. Basically what I'm doing here is I'm going to continue to move the flame in a circular motion in order to heat all of that metal as continuously and evenly as possible. And it does take a little bit of time to melt the metal. There is no like fast way of doing this. You just have to get the metal hot enough. As we're doing this, occasionally too, I'm going to actually point my flame toward my piece. I might even sometimes heat the flask itself, and part of the reason that I did that is we worked a little bit slower here, and I have to make sure that my flask stays hot enough while we're working. And part of the reason I keep talking too is hopefully you can see some of my pieces of metal are still in the original shapes, which means they're not hot enough to melt, because metal technically is going to form a drop, just like a piece of water. It technically has a liquid state to it. And I need to continue heating this in a circular motion to make sure that I'm melting all of it. And part of the reason that I'm using this pick, this is actually a welding rod that I have in here. It's not going to damage your metal, but it's actually going to help me stir and figure out if all of my metal has become in a liquid state so that I can create my cast the way that it's supposed to work. So again, it's almost getting there. I can tell it's getting much more liquidy than before, but it is going to take a little bit of time to get that heated up just right. And after I get this whole batch liquid and it's almost there, I'm going to ask Miss Wendell to start putting pieces in. What I need now is like one of the little pieces of metal. And with pieces that small, you can just keep adding unless I tell you to stop. And part of the reason that I'm saying that is I'm keeping the metal hot over here in the crucible, and the student, who is Miss Wendell right now, is actually adding the pieces of silver until we get all of those pieces added, because again, that was our full weight with the 20% extra to make sure that we have the screws and the button. There's that one piece that's really awkward. Yeah. So hopefully you guys noticed too, if you had made something else out of silver, you could melt down any silver from home if you have pieces. Or if you've got pieces from other works that you've made, literally that piece just melted right into there, and we're going to create a new piece with it. So again, these processes, can you just, after that one holds up for a minute, because those last ones were a little bit thick, so I have to make sure that I get everything melted completely before we put any more in there.
Do I stir or you?
I stir. Okay. It's safer. So hopefully you guys can see it got a little bit solid in there because of how many pieces of metal, but now it's liquid again, and we can continue adding more pieces. And you don't have to worry about, rushing a ton. You just have to work as carefully and quickly as you can. It doesn't have to be at the speed of light. Just take your time and move as carefully as you can. How many more pieces do you have? Okay. Actually, can I have those? So what I'm going to do with these last little bits is I'm literally just going to dump them all in, and then I'm going to make sure that they all get molten. I'm going to take my rod and make sure that I check that everything is completely liquid. And now what the student is going to do is she's going to take a tiny little bit. So if you look at this, this is about how much borax you should have at any time I ask for it. So go ahead and put that on. And again, what the borax does is it's taking any impurities out of the metal or any dirt so that your cast actually works. Go ahead one more time. That actually looks really good. This looks really clean to me. And I have a little bit here that I'm scraping off the side. But now what I'm going to ask the student to do is lift up the cover, and literally the student is going to put the cover right on the edges of the box, like way on the top. So put this up like this. And then what we're going to do is, I'm still heating, I'm going to grab the centrifuge, let the stopper go, and then we're going to close the lid really, really fast. And some of you might be surprised by this, so just on the count of 3, what I need you to do is just close as quickly as you can, okay? 1, 2, 3. And so literally what happened there is the student closed this as quickly as possible, and you can tell it's shaking, so what's happening? Can you take that off? Okay. And also, I moved to the side and turned my torch off And hopefully you can see it's still going because there's that much force here. It's actually just shooting the metal where it needed to go. And what I'm gonna do, because I'm the teacher, is I'm just gonna stop this. And literally you can see there's no more metal in the crucible. And I'm also going to take that same tongs that I had earlier, and I'm gonna pick up this flask. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take with my gloves and I'm gonna quench into this bucket. And what's gonna happen is, hopefully you guys saw it too, I actually did end up with a button. You need to, oh, and I dropped it by accident, which is okay. I'm trying to pick it back up, and what's gonna happen, hopefully you guys can see it's actually bubbling there. What happens is it's so hot that the water around the investment starts to boil, and it actually, it breaks open the flask. So in about 2 minutes, we're gonna reach down in this bucket and release the mold from the cast that we just did. So now my cast is actually quenched in the bucket, and I'm gonna actually take it out. It is pretty cool. It's still a little bit warm on the top because I'm rushing this for the sake of our demonstration. Here my piece fell out. So here I have my piece, and I might want to take a toothbrush to get the rest of the investment off of the sprues and off of the button. So here you can see I have a button, I have my sprues, and I have the piece that I did. Now, the one thing I'm going to mention about my piece is, again, we just used an example to show you this for the video. This is not finished at all. If you do this, you're going to have a lot of cleanup work. So you should really make it as small, filed and sanded as possible. And after you get your piece out, the next thing that you do, to be courteous to the next person because they were all clean when you used them, is you are going to clean out your flask. That's part of your studio maintenance grade, remember? And you can, of course, use a toothbrush if you want to. Remember to get it completely clean, and then you're just gonna put it back in the containers that you got it from. Once you've cleaned out all the investment, what we're gonna do is actually put this into the pickle, and you'll see that in just a minute. So the toothbrush that I was using is normally in one of these containers that is above the sink. Right now I only had one, but there's probably a bunch more on the other side because we use the same kind of stuff when we are sometimes cleaning our pieces when they come out of the pickle. So there's more toothbrushes, you just need to actually go and grab one. And now we're gonna go put this in the pickle and put the piece away. So here's what I was talking about with the more toothbrushes. They're actually right over by the pickle. I'm actually gonna take my piece, and I should be wearing goggles, so before I do this, I'm gonna go put goggles on. But I'm gonna take my flask, put the flask away. And so the last thing I wanna do is actually put my piece in the pickle. Now that I have my safety glasses on, I can actually just drop it in the regular pickle because this is a piece of silver. We wanna put it in the regular pickle, and we also wanna make sure that the pickle pot is on. When we take our piece out, we should actually turn the pickle pot off. And then you can actually go and take the sprues off by either using cutting pliers, that green handled cutting pliers, or the saw.